As late afternoon turned to dusk, Salvatore Speciale awoke to the bustle of shift workers coming home from their daily toils. This was not unusual for him, as his business often had him in the streets at odd hours. Rising from bed, he strolled to the kitchen and had a leftover biscuit from the night before for breakfast. He then dressed for the evening and began his nightly stroll down Prince Street. As he walked, Especial thought about his life and the course it was taking. The pressure he'd begun to feel since before the death of Madonia grew more intense by the day. Petrosino and the law were an unstoppable force, while Giuseppe Morello and his gang were an immovable object. And now, Sala Speciale was caught in the middle. Looking back, the full-time criminal and part-time informant couldn't see how anything could have been done differently. For Speciale, any life other than one of crime was beyond his ability to grasp. He'd made a profitable arrangement with both the Morello mob and at times various law enforcement agencies as an informant. He had merely thought of these arrangements as looking out for his best interests at the time, keeping his options open in other words. Though long-term strategy was a trifle beyond him, he had the nagging feeling that there was a corner he couldn't see around. He was always careful never to give too much information to Detective Petrosino whenever they met, just enough to keep the heat off. He was careful how he moved as well. At least he thought he was. In reality, he had several routines, and the mob had gotten wise to them all. As he rounded into an alley near his favorite saloon, he ran headfirst into Tommaso the Ox Petto. Petto, who had been waiting quietly for over an hour, pulled a gun from his waist and pointed it at the head of Salvatore Speciale. To a Speciale, the muzzle looked like the black eye of the devil. It was a thought the young man had only a moment to ponder before Petto squeezed the trigger, and the black leapt from the gun, encompassing him entirely. After checking to make sure the man was dead, Petto holstered his gun and slipped into the shadows. Emerging an hour later, he made his way back down Prince Street to Morello's saloon, where he met his boss and reported that the deed had been done. When police searched Speciale's room after his body was discovered, they found a steamship ticket to Naples sitting on his desk. This led detectives to believe he was planning to flee the country. The investigation into the Morello mob had officially ground to a halt. After failing miserably to bring down the gang, McCluskey and his squad were reassigned. That meant that the job of keeping an eye on Morello and his men fell to the patrolmen of the 104th Street precinct. These men were unequipped to deal with such well-organized criminals. Rather than concentrating as Petrosino urged on quietly amassing fragments of intelligence, law enforcement instead engaged in a campaign of petty harassment. This apathetic approach by the police caused another surge in growth for the crime family. In the year following Madonia's murder, Morello became even more treacherous and unforgiving. He acted as an autocrat, suppressing all dissent while seeking advice from his closest lieutenants less and less. Only Lupo the Wolf, of all his numerous associates, did not shake in fear when he walked into a room. The remaining members of the family acted as much from terror as from loyalty. Things outside the family were changing as well. NYPD surveillance of the Morellos dwindled to nothing as the local precinct struggled to handle policing the gang. In an effort to be seen as effective, the local cops again ramped up their policy of harassment. Rather than slowing the gang's progress, however, this policy had the opposite effect. It instead caused the Morellos to be more secretive. Due to this tightening of operations, the Morello mob became one of the most organized criminal groups in the city. Other powerful Black Hand gangs, such as the one led by Giosuè Gallucci, had also been gaining power in Little Italy. Gallucci controlled large numbers and prostitution rackets in the quarter, and as he grew wealthier, he began to cultivate political strength among the immigrant Italian community. Gallucci purchased a 6-story tenement at 318 East 109th Street for $30,000. The first floor was used as a bakery store with a small cafe in the rear and ovens situated in the basement. His family lived on the second floor above the shop. While powerful crews like his were too strong to eliminate, smaller independent operators were put out of business by Lupo and Morello. If they liked you, They met with you and informed you that you now worked for them. And if they didn't like you, you would probably take 2 to the head. Also, if they wanted to make a statement, oftentimes they would plant a bomb on someone's front porch. During this time, the number of bombings in New York City increased 2-fold. Italian Harlem was now ruled by the Morello mob. With McCluskey and his squad having dropped the investigation, and the local precinct doing little to impede the progress of the Black Hand in New York, the Morello family began to position itself as the preeminent organized crime syndicate on the East Coast. Looking to start pushing counterfeit bills again in Pennsylvania, Morello called his top enforcer, Tommaso Petto, into a meeting. Petto had become a top target of local law enforcement, so putting him in charge of an operation far from home seemed like a win-win situation. Petto arrived and sat across from his boss. After greeting each other, Morello got down to business. "I want you to go to Pittston and set up our operations there and in Wilkes-Barre. It is time for expansion, Tommaso, and strong men like you are needed for this endeavor." Petto looked surprised at this. "Grazie, Don Morello. You've shown me great respect," Petto said clumsily. The two embraced, and Petto rose from his seat and headed for the door. After the meeting was over, Petto, his wife, and 2 young children relocated to Browntown, just south of Pittston. This was in the early summer of 1905. There, under the name of Luciano Perino, he quickly established himself as the leader of a crew rumored to be affiliated with the Black Hand. As a front for his underworld activities, he opened a grocery and a butcher shop along South Main Street in the downtown area. This was just a short distance from the Susquehanna River. With everything set up, counterfeit bills of every denomination soon hit the state of Pennsylvania like a monsoon. Meanwhile, back home, things were getting out of control. In an effort to effect change, a New Jersey-born lawman named William McAdoo was appointed as the New York City Police Commissioner. After assuming office, McAdoo came up with a wild idea. He wanted to build a team of men that knew the Italian language, knew the Italian criminals, and knew the neighborhood of Italian Harlem. After consulting city, state, and federal officials, it was decided that a special task force was needed to take on the Black Hand in New York. McAdoo decided the first man he needed to talk to was NYPD resident expert on the Mafia, Joe Petrosino. Catching Petrosino at the precinct after hours was not surprising to McAdoo. The man had a reputation for work ethic and determination within law enforcement circles. Walking up to Petrosino at the duty desk, McAdoo introduced himself. Petrosino smiled and said, "I know who you are, Commissioner. I also think I know why you're here." Taken aback by the boldness of Petrosino, McAdoo responded, "Okay, Sergeant, tell me then." Petrosino smiled and said, "You are going to ask me to be part of your new Italian squad. Isn't that the gist of it?" It was McAdoo's turn to smile. "Whoever your source is gave you faulty information, Detective. I'm not asking you to join the new task force that is being created to bring down the Black Hand in New York. I'm asking you to lead it." There was a long, drawn-out silence. Petrosino stared at the ground intensely. McAdoo was just about to break that silence when Petrosino interrupted him. "Yes, I'll do it," he said, his face unreadable as stone. "However, Commissioner, I want to build this team right. We must employ the strictest of standards." McAdoo returned Petrosino's gaze. "See that it is done. Come by my office tomorrow so we can go over details." The two then shook hands and McAdoo left. On the walk home, McAdoo suppressed a smile. He knew he had chosen the right man. The next day, the 2 men met for coffee. Together, they decided that they needed the support of men Petrosino did not have to supervise or teach the ins and outs of the Italian culture. So the 2 men scoured the NYPD for other people who could not only understand the Sicilian dialect, but also its customs and traditions. Unfortunately, there were very few Italian policemen in New York at the time, but the 2 would eventually find what they were looking for. The first man chosen was one of Petrosino's deputies named Maurice Bonsol. The Bonsol was of Irish and French descent. He had grown up in the Sicilian quarter of the city and spoke the dialect better than he did English. Another officer chosen for the task force was a man by the name of Hugh Cassidy. Cassidy, joining the ranks of the Italian squad, dumbfounded newspaper reporters until one of the more enterprising of their number discovered that the man had been born Ugo Cassidy and had changed his name to Hugh Cassidy as a young man. Other members of the Italian squad were as follows: John Arciopoli, Rocco Cavone, Peter Dondero, Joseph DiGilio, Michael Miali, Ralph Miselli, Paul Simonetti, Edward Castagno, John Crowley, Louis Dardis, Liborio Gambardella, Bernardo Grattano, Frank Mundo, James Pellegrino, Joseph Pucciano, Silvio Ripeto, Eugene Scrivanti, and Angelo Trezza. The new Italian squad and Petrosino's appointment to lead it were both well received by many of the honest Italian immigrants in the community. Many were the victims of crimes themselves, and the lack of trust between these victims and law enforcement allowed the Morello gang and those like it to operate with impunity. Because Petrosino and his squad were seen as Italian first and police officers second, they were able to obtain a modicum of trust within the local population. Petrosino's new squad scored an early victory when they arrested and deported a high-level Neapolitan criminal named Enrico Alfero to Italy. Alfero was the head of an extremely powerful branch of the Camorra in Naples. He had fled to the United States after the murder of a rival boss. His deportation resulted in an 11-month trial and 30 convictions, and the fiercest blow struck against the Camorra in Naples up to that time. The arrest and deportation of Alfero gained Petrosino and the squad a level of notoriety, as he was widely feared from Brooklyn to Naples. A quote from a New York Times article stated, "In light of a demigod, he was thought to be invulnerable to bullets and able at all times to escape his pursuers." Petrosino himself became one of the most well-known policemen in the nation, with several publications writing about his exploits. One local reporter described Petrosino in an article. "He is short in stature, but stoutly built. He is clean-shaven and shows a strong but determined jaw. The mouth is firm, the lips are set in a straight line, suggesting purpose rather than severity. The eyes are not the searching eyes of an inquisitive prodder, but the intelligent eyes of a student. There is generally a kindly light in them, a light that makes one feel easy in the mind. They invite you to be confidential, and when the straight line of the lips breaks into a smile, you can readily imagine that you are talking to some gentle and thoughtful person who has your best interests at heart. Petrosino is suave, but this is never discovered until too late, and the Italian criminal who has been chatting with him over a wicker-jacketed Chianti bottle finds a strong hand clasping his wrist, and the information is given to him that he is under arrest." This new notoriety, however, and putting criminals away in Naples, was not Petrosino's goal. Above all, he wanted to see the power of the Black Hand broken here at home, and not only in Italian Harlem, but the entirety of New York. It was a cool evening in late summer when forgotten Morello Lieutenant Giuseppe DiPrimo was paroled from Sing Sing prison. It was strange because according to his sentence, he was not due for parole for almost another year. DiPrimo knew this date like he knew his birthday. Still, here he was getting released. Waiting to pick him up was a gumbada from the old country. As he and his old friend chatted, DiPrimo would receive information that would change the course of his life. The word on the street was that Tommaso the Oxpeto had been the man that had killed his brother-in-law. In a quiet rage, DiPrimo decided then and there he was going to have revenge at whatever cost. On the evening of Saturday, October 21st, 1905, Petto was working at his butcher shop until late in the evening. Tommaso and a local thug named Frank Culoro were arguing over late payments. $2 every week until the money is repaid, Tommaso grunted. That is not what we agreed, Culoro fired back. You got a bad memory, but you need to remember this. If I have to come looking for you tomorrow, I won't want the money anymore, Petto said in a menacing tone. You think because you're from New York that we fear you? I promise you, if you come looking for me tomorrow, you will find death waiting instead, Kuloro yelled while stomping out. Petto was infuriated, but not to the point of chasing the man out the door and killing him. This wasn't Prince Street after all. About an hour later, he closed up shop and began the long walk across town to his home on Lincoln Street. Not known as a deep thinker, Petto strolled along almost aimlessly, thinking of nothing deeper than what his wife might have cooked for him for dinner. Arriving on his street, the outdoors seemed suddenly quiet to Petto. Though not a mental giant, he had a marvelous antenna for danger, and all of a sudden, all needles swung to the red. He brought his hand down to his waist, reaching under his coat as he walked. When he was just a few hundred paces from his door, Petto heard a twig snap and pulled out the .38 caliber revolver he had concealed. Spinning around, he saw nothing but shadows. Taking a few deep breaths, he began to relax. A moment later, one of the shadows emerged from behind a cart. Petto was struck in the right side by a blast of small caliber shot fired at close range. The pellets embedded into his right arm, right side, and right hip. The bullets just kept coming. A large chunk of lead then tore into the right side of his chest and proceeded downward, severing his spine and leaving a gaping exit wound. Another slug smashed Petto's handgun and in the process destroyed the hand holding it. As the light faded from Petto's eyes, the last thing he saw was a giant shadow holding a gun. "This is for my gumbada, Benedetto," the shadow rasped before firing the final slug into his brain. Tommaso the Ox Petto was no more. No great loss. A few days later, Niccolo Terranova, who was now calling himself Nick, arrived at the Prince Street Saloon and walked directly into the back room where a meeting was taking place between Morello and some of his men. The door opened and everyone inside stared at Niccolo. Seeing his brother's distress, however, Morello rose from his chair. Before he could begin calming his brother, Niccolo spoke. "The ox has been killed in Pittston." After giving him this news, Niccolo had expected his brother's outburst to be emotional and violent. Instead, Morello hugged his brother and whispered a sentiment of sympathy in his ear. Confused at this reaction, Nick Terranova looked unsure about what to say next. So Morello spoke instead. "Leave the affair of our poor friend Tommaso to me. I'll settle this affair. For now we will mourn his loss and support his family," Morello said before turning back to his meeting. Nick Terranova turned on his heels and walked out. He now had a piece of new information without being told. His brother had for some reason wanted Tommaso Petto dead, and may have even had a hand in his murder. Terranova could not stop his mind from going down the rabbit hole before him. He recalled how upset his brother was with Petto when the police found the tin watch and the pawn ticket. "My entire fortune brought to dust because that idiota stole a $1 watch from a corpse," he remembered his brother yelling. Terranova also remembered his brother expressing genuine sadness that a stalwart like DePrimo had to serve 6 years for his brother-in-law's idiocy. As the pieces fell together in his mind, Nick Terranova became overwhelmed. Both fear and awe fought for control of his thoughts as he pondered Giuseppe's machinations. Terranova walked faster, as if doing so might allow him to outrun his mad thoughts, leaving them behind in the squalor of the city. Indeed, Morello seemed to take Petto's death in stride. On the home front, things were looking better and better. Morello now had his crews hijacking wagons and stealing shipments. The crews were so effective, it seemed that anything not nailed down would be taken. All stolen merchandise was of course resold at a discount, making Giuseppe Morello into sort of a Robin Hood character. Even the sale of stolen horses was lucrative. It was a happy and profitable time for the family. Older, larger, yet less organized gangs such as the 5 Points began losing their footing in the rackets all over the city to smaller, nimble, more organized criminal groups. As the Morello family became more powerful, many of these smaller gangs began falling under their umbrella, with some of their leaders even becoming capos. Early in his rise, Morello and his gang had done jobs for the 5 Points and their leader, Paul Kelly. This fundamental power shift from a neighborhood cosca to the most powerful organization in the underworld was illustrated when the leader of the gang, Paul Kelly, who was born Francesco Paolo Vasarely, arrived quietly at the saloon one evening through a back door. Kelly was one of the toughest and most well-known gangsters in the city, so when he arrived, he was treated with every courtesy. Morello sat with his old friend and listened. "It's bad, paisan. Everything's fractured. Everyone's fighting. I can't even trust my own guys," Kelly breathed with a fatalistic shrug that Morello admired. "Do not fret, Paolo. I have a place. A secret place. I'll put a couple guys in the lobby as well so you'll have peace of mind," Morello said with some compassion. "Grazie, paisan," Kelly said, hugging his friend. And there it was, the subtle shift in the power dynamic. The new Morello crime family was now a force to be reckoned with all over the city. That very day, the clutch hand welcomed the old gangster to East 116th Street and moved him to a furnished apartment in a building that had just been purchased by friends of the family. However, Morello's favors always came with price tags. Morello used Kelly and other allies in Little Italy such as Gio Gallucci to make contacts with local politicians and judges. Soon, a system of payoffs was implemented in the local courts and government, similar to what was done with police precincts in the area. This further shielded the Morello rackets while better insulating its leaders. It seemed like the Morello mob were to remain untouchable. However, the Italian squad had different ideas. Despite one of his top informants, Salvatore Speciale, being found dead of a gunshot wound, Petrosino and his squad had been working hard to develop other sources. Through the arrest of low-level gangsters, the team was able to make a small dent in the counterfeit currency trade. For Petrosino, though, it seemed like trying to empty the entire ocean with a small bucket. He needed something to get people's attention focused on the real problem. Ironically, it would be the Morello mob who would give him what he wanted when the kidnapping of Antonio Bazuffi set the enclave of Italian Harlem on its head. Bazuffi was the 14-year-old son of one of the wealthiest private bankers in Little Italy. The kidnapping hadn't been reported by the family. Still, word reached the precinct and Joe Petrosino nonetheless. On his walk to the family's home, Petrosino went over what he knew, which wasn't much. Knowledge of Bazuffi's wealth was common in Little Italy, giving many a motive. However, the father was a man Morello was acquainted with for sure. The two had worked together to charter a front company for the clan a few years back. As these thoughts danced in his head, Petrosino finally arrived at the boy's home. As he attempted to knock, he was immediately told to leave by the boy's nervous parents. Petrosino stubbornly placed his foot between the door and the jamb. "You must speak to me, signore," Petrosino asked, not unkindly. The boy's father was sweating profusely. To Petrosino, he looked very much like an animal in a trap. "Officer Petrosino, please. We mean no disrespect, but we wish to handle this situation within our family," the elder Bazuffi said from the door of his home. "This is not a situation that calls for police." Not deterred, Petrosino tried once again. "You cannot trust these men," Petrosino almost begged this time. "If somebody doesn't stand up to them, they will do this again to another family. Do you want that on your conscience?" Petrosino almost yelled this time, but it was too late. His sentence had been cut off by the door closing in his face. Running out of options and fearing for the boy's life in spite of his parents, Petrosino decided to bring in the boss for questioning. He and his men arrived in force and picked up Giuseppe Morello outside his saloon on 8 Prince Street. After being taken to the precinct, Morello was put inside the interrogation room at the instruction of Joe Petrosino. Then the old sergeant followed him in. Once the two men were alone, he started in on the mob boss. "Look, Giuseppe, we know that no one would ever consider kidnapping the son of one of your associates. No one would dare. That means you must have him. Tell us where the boy is. He's innocent, for God's sakes," Petrosino implored. Supremely relaxed, Morello grinned as he spoke. I heard the boy ran off, maybe with a girl. You know how young love can be. Besides, a little bird was spreading a rumor that he returned home just this very morning. Petrosino's jaw dropped. He then spun on his heels and walked out. It wasn't long before he was able to confirm what he'd been told. The boy had been released near his home just minutes after they picked up Morello. Petrosino eventually got the entire story. The boy was held captive for 3 days while a ransom of $20,000 was negotiated. After his release, young Antonio described being tied to a bed and tortured with stilettos by a group of masked Sicilians. Despite this horrific ordeal, the family refused to cooperate or even admit that they paid a ransom. Their story was that the boy ran off and now was home. As was the case every single time prior, Petrosino was again forced to release Morello. While generally thought of as the brain of the operation, Giuseppe Morello was not the only mobster in the family to innovate new rackets. Lupo and one of his young soldiers named Antonio Scala took a small scam and turned it into what was to be a huge moneymaker. The idea was to lodge fraudulent insurance claims. Members of the gang would encourage frightened shopkeepers to purchase expensive fire insurance policies. Then, when the policy was in effect, Scala would set the property ablaze and collect a substantial portion of the claim. Scala explained the scam to Morello in detail one night over drinks. So the Mark owns a store of some kind. You have it insured against fire. He has paid insurance on the property. Now to profit on the investment, you must burn. The Mark does not wish to do it himself because it's too risky, so he sends for me. I plan and start a fire that will never be questioned. When the insurance company pays him, he pays me, Scala finished. Morello was intrigued by this new scheme. He waved for Scala to continue. I like to use glycerine, he explained, mixed with other matters. It don't smell and it leaves no traces behind. A job like this usually takes 3 or 4 men. I direct them and they bring the material. Then I pay them $5 each a night for the time they work, Scala added. Can they be trusted? Morello asked intently. They could be trusted to fear you, Scala said, smiling. That will be enough, Morello said grimly. With so much money coming in, Morello began to set up local monopolies as legitimate businesses. The coal racket, the ice racket, the laundry racket, even foodstuffs, all brought in substantial sums. With all the major wholesalers fixing prices and paying a percentage to the racketeers, incredible wealth was built. The chicken racket alone in West Washington Market was thought to be worth at least $100,000. Morello's half-brother Vincent Terranova ruled the ice delivery racket in Italian Harlem through his company Morello and Barbero, while new capo Gaetano Reina controlled ice distribution in the Bronx. Meanwhile, the youngest Terranova brother Ciro gradually became more powerful in the foodstuffs market, monopolizing the importation of certain vegetables such as artichokes. Morello's soldiers were becoming more capable as well. All were now proficient with firearms and methods of killing were developed. Morello's new top assassin was a man in his 30s with prematurely graying hair and a dark complexion named Lulu Vicari. One of Flynn's informants told Petrosino that Vicari was the most dangerous man in Morello's gang. Meanwhile, Ignazio Lupo was doing very well. He was notorious for eliminating competition in the grocery business by any means necessary. His methods weren't very scientific, but worked due to Lupo's hands-on approach. Being a grocery store proprietor became a very dangerous business in Manhattan. Lupo also came up with a plan to capitalize on the booming construction market in a city struggling to accommodate 1 million new immigrants each year. A 6-story tenement block could be put up for about $25,000 and when completed contained 24 small apartments, each of which could be rented at a rate of about $130 a year. Developers could thus recover their investment over an 8-year period while retaining a highly valuable asset in the tenement itself. Since not even the Morello family's illegal enterprises generated the sort of funds required to pay for the construction of entire tenement blocks, Lupo arranged to sell shares in a newly incorporated construction company and then obtain mortgages on suitable lots. The result was the formation of a company called the Ignaz Florio Cooperative Association among Corleonesi, and it became a resounding success. Anyone who got in the way ended up in a barrel. It seemed as though the Morello crime family had its tentacles in every aspect of life in New York City. Petrosino and his Italian squad saw this slow buildup of corruption in the shadows. Many times he felt like this fight he started with the Morellos was tantamount to pissing in the wind. The leaders of the gang were now so well insulated, none were ever near the commission of any crime. However, Petrosino was not giving up. The bit was in his teeth. He would see Morello and Lupo in prison or die trying.